last speaker of this morning session is Agnès Giboreau, coming from the Institut Bocuse in Lyon, France. And she will speak about different aspects of sensory and feeding and meal in different contexts. So thank you, Agnès.
Thank you, Luc. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I have open to speak French or English, so I choose French, and I rely on professional translators for those who don't speak French.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share some of our results here. This is for several reasons. First of all, institutional reasons, collaborations between the Rhône-Alpes region and the Bourgogne, partnership between Vitigora and the European Centre for Nutrition and Health and its members. There is a stand here that you can go and visit, and then there's this partnership with the Centre for Taste and Food Sciences, and I was trained in Dijon as well, so I'm very happy to be here to talk to you today. Today I'd like to talk to you about our research approach concerning the understanding of food pleasure through work that we're carrying out as part of catering for different homes and centres. I'd like to show that many factors come into play in pleasure and the contribution of this pleasure to health. So, the Bocuse Research Center is part of a school that is recognized by the state that trains people to work in the catering business. Our students focus on food pleasure. The idea is to make sure that we put ourselves in a real situation in terms of food consumption or food preparation. So the title of this presentation illustrates the scientific positioning of our research. In other words, we started with a model, a bottom-up model from engineering sciences, where we consider that everything is in food. Physico-chemical properties that generate colors, odors, textures, etc. But there are also nutritional profiles, and we'll be talking about that more this evening, about the food labeling question. We consider that we have to take into account the entire meal experience, and this is what I'd like to illustrate today. Now, you are familiar with the issue that has been widely described in literature, especially concerning sociology and psychology, so whereby the characteristics of an individual, well, you can link up the circles. The characteristics of an individual have to be taken into account in order to understand the attitudes, expectations and beliefs of each person in relation to their own history, their own culture. We've just seen the differences between French people and other countries in terms of pleasure. So we may query, representations linked to certain foods. I am what I eat. Am I what I eat? All of these phenomena are very important in terms of behavior and choices made by individuals. Understanding this is essential, we believe, if we want to meet the objectives of public health and pleasure in the catering business. It's not because I will be... This is not what I'm going to be focusing on specifically today. I'm going to be focusing on the control that is important in the catering industry. So, food products, I'll be talking about the engineering position, you know, how do you formulate food, how do you study how consumers perceive and feel about different food products. There are many specialists in these fields here today. There are some very specific tools for formulators. However, the relationship between food products and beliefs, expectations of people show that there are top-down processes that basically modulate our perception of food products, and we must take into account these interactions, these cognitive and social interactions, in order to develop food products that are found pleasing. Over the last few years, much work has focused on the different contextual effects in terms of appreciation, perception, consumption of food, notably in catering, with models that have underlined the concept of 1,000 experience. In other words, a food product is most often, well, is always part of a consumption product. There are other products present, there are other drinks present, and you have to take the individual in the physical environment. All of this has an effect on the perception of the food product. So I'm going to illustrate what I mean by this in what follows. So the model that we are using for studying these different factors is as follows. So it's always important to take into account the characteristics of the eater and their mental representations. So this is to underline that, you know, we can have a marketing strategy with a consumer target. This is basically the same principle, the same idea, except that we're basing what we do on hypotheses relating to perception models that take into account age, gender, consumer habits, but also knowledge, socio-economic environments, cultural environments. These all have an impact on these mental representations and models. So there are the characteristics of the food products that are important. Here we can act as producers of meals. And the second thing that I'm going to talk about, the second thing that we can influence, is labeling the context of the restaurant and the presentation of the dish or menu in the catering industry or outside the home. So we've got the kitchen and the dining room side in this pie. This is what we focus on in the Bocuse Institute. We train people to cook, or bake, and we train people to manage restaurants. So we work with waiters, people who are in charge of welcoming customers. In terms of the dish itself, the focus is on the food product, and here the question might be concerning the kind of recipe we're going to develop to make sure that the consumer feels the pleasure that we want them to feel. But also, presentation is another important factor, content as well. The plate and the layout on the plate are also important factors. And there's also the name that plays an important role, and I'll give you some examples of that. I don't want to focus too much on this part of my presentation. I don't know if you can see, but this reflects work that we've been carrying out for several years with the city of Lyon and cooking schools. We're working on the understanding of sensory factors and contextual factors and cognitive factors in terms of behavior, appreciation and choice of vegetables. And here the work that we carried out last year consisted in adding small ingredients to modify the recipe so that we could for different food products, and we showed that in relation to the level of appreciation, the modulator may be positive or neutral. In other words, a food product that isn't liked by children, if you add some cheese to it or a crouton to it, that will highlight the value of the food product and increase consumption of it. However, a food product that is already well liked, like the carrot, that can be undermined and less consumed if you add parsley or chives that children tend not to like. So all of these factors are, of course, essential. They have to be understood and they have to be measured, and that's what we are trying to do, and that's why we've been implementing these tests in real-life situations. We're also interested in the choice of cutlery and dishes used, plates used in the experimental restaurant, and we have shown, in fact this work was carried out with the University of Oxford and Valence. Here we showed that for one of the desserts that there was a significant difference in the liking of the dessert, visual liking, on a white plate, but the difference in dessert liking was not that big. So this work is work that is ongoing for us. We're using multimodal integration models developed by Charles Spence and his team with whom we work. I've also chosen this example just to illustrate, you know, the way you lay out food on a plate. You've got a recipe, okay, but how do you lay out the food products on the plate to make them more appealing? This also reflects that our research focuses on hospital catering and restaurant catering. So, in Tel Aviv, they have a hospital with a central kitchen. This is something that we studied. And in Lyon, for example, there is a central kitchen that works with different hospitals. Here we worked with the chef from the Tel Aviv hospital, and we worked with the chefs from both establishments, and they were allowed to work on the recipes without changing the recipe, but they were allowed to do their own thing without changing the plates, without changing the recipe. So experiments were carried out with an experimental group and a control group using, let's just have a look at the photos. So here, this is the same recipe with a different kind of layout, a different presentation in terms of the position of these food products and the way the sauce has been poured over the plate. I think there were about 20 recipes that were tried out. The evaluation was carried out during Nutrition Days, which is a European event. I think every year there are 10,000 respondents that are involved, so from different hospitals across the world. So they use the same questionnaire and they see, you know, how things evolve in relation to the diseases that they suffer from. So here we added a question about consumption, you know, in terms of the plate, what was on the plate, and why they might not have eaten everything that was on the plate. So this is what we see from the control group and the experimental group, what's left on the plate. And here are some results concerning what's left on the plate. We can see that the experimental group ate the food more than the control group, and they liked the food better. So you can see there's a big difference between the two groups, the experimental group and the control group. So this provides hope in terms of improving food in hospitals. You know, how do you use food to improve well-being? So concerning food products, I remember I talked about the title of the dish. We have been working with Florent Boivin, who is a chef in our experimental school, and we're currently studying names of dishes and the role of these names in terms of liking. So we have two approaches. So we ask, based on photos of dishes, we ask consumers what they see. We ask them how they might imagine the name of the dish. Or we work on real dishes in a real eating situation.
So this is one of those dishes. I let you think of the possible name that could be given to the dish. I'm sure you all have an idea. Now, what are the ingredients? You may have recognized foie gras with mango chutney, pineapple, lettuce, vanilla, etc. So these are a few examples of the names that consumers have been proposing, offering for these dishes, and that is the final name that the chef opted for. So that gives us, in fact, I would say, room for maneuver to increase the palatability of a plate just by naming it. So this is another example with the name that was given in the end. There we are. So that's for what can be done on the kitchen side. So the choice of the recipe, then the layout of the plate, the actual dish, the serving dish, and the name. Now, what about the dining room? How can the dining room and the staff can play a role with the food? So, of course, everything is to be taken into account. The staff, the decoration, where the guests are, then of course the music, the dishes, the furniture, but also the facilities like the cloakroom, etc. So just to give you a definition of this work, this has been undertaken only recently as part of our activity, therefore we still have no real results on these parameters. Let me just introduce two studies. One that we conducted along with the American Army. They have an interest in the role of the atmosphere to offer a higher degree of relaxation to soldiers who back from a mission and who have a high degree of stress. So we've tried to assess the potential for changing the state of stress just by the decoration, the atmosphere. For example, in this kind of setting, clients seem to be a little more relaxed than in other dining rooms, and that was just because of the choice of colors. So the next step was to have subjects being in a situation of stress. Of course, this was done with the Committee on Ethics, quite obviously, as most of our projects, by the way. And we wanted just to compare the relaxing effect of a blue-colored atmosphere or another color, blue being the most relaxing of all, obviously. Now, this is another example about the questions that we raise in our institute. I told you about school catering services. This is another example with an old age pension home, a retirement home, actually. We have, in fact, quite a lot of factors that are not under control. So we have been working here within the framework of a European project with retirement homes. So we considered 3 projects and have tested, therefore, 3 different atmospheres along with our match D. So we have, for example, here a very colorful a table with, I would say, plain cutlery and dishes. Then we have a more flowery decoration, and the last one was perhaps a little more comfortable and warm, reminiscent of fireside tables, etc., with the family. So the questionnaires were self-administered, and the staff checked the actual consumption of the food. So this is just to show that the feeling like eating food appeared stronger in the family and the flowery environment. So obviously we can also motivate the elderly in eating more or eating better. Now, as a conclusion, of course, we should think that there are more variables, which I presented in my introduction. They are also essential, and we consider them in most cases to be controlled or at least defined by comparing various groups. Sharing, for example, the same type of motivation for being in a given situation. So evening meals with friends or luncheons at work, etc. So motivation is one thing, but also the type of restaurant, the type of dining room is to be taken into account. We cannot compare different types of settings. And the idea is to try and identify types of consumers depending on how they identify with the food, with the restaurant in question, or other aspects. And also some knowledge about cooking can also be an important factor. So we believe that this is very important if we want to continue innovating and also to meet public health issues in terms of global health and balance. So we believe that several surveys are necessary and actions to mitigate are of course necessary. So on the cognitive world and the mix between food and the various aspects, then we have to think of the physiology with feelings, needs, etc., and then the physical aspect to better take into account the expectations of clients and their motivation to eat a given food in a given context. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the picture of the various people who have taken part in this work. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Agnès. Donc là aussi, on a le temps pour quelques questions.
Thank you, Agnès. I think we can take a few questions from the audience, if any.
Donc je vais là aussi commencer, mais il n'y a que moi qui parle.
So I'm sorry, it seems that I'm always the first to kick off. So I have a question on one of your very last slides. You said that depending on the layout of the table, the decoration of the table, you can increase the feel for food, but it doesn't translate into an increased consumption, actually. It's just a motivation to eat, but not eating more. Well, for that particular example, we were in a retirement home, and we actually have two hypotheses concerning food consumption in retirement homes. I'd say that we've identified several factors related to cognitive aspects. For this very first survey, we didn't take into account the overall atmosphere. Actually, we first well, let me put it that way. We're currently working with elderly persons being in retirement homes with or without cognitive disorders. Now, depending on the degree of cognitive disorders, the factors that come into play are related either to the foodstuff itself. For example, for Alzheimer's patients, it is important to reinforce the sensory aspect to sort of push them into eating more. Whereas for people without cognitive disorders, The psychological status at the time of the meal is very important. For example, if an incident has occurred with the caregivers or with waiting too long for the lift, whatever may have happened, is something that may have a repercussion on the motivation to eat or not to eat. It can also be the person seated next to you. As you know, people are seated in the restaurant room. If you have someone sick or someone with maybe an abnormal or I would say different behavior next to you, this can come as a shock and then change the feel for food. So the efforts undertaken by all the staff to change the atmosphere will certainly be trivial in such circumstances. Now, did you take into account the effect of the atmosphere depending on the social professional categories, knowing that some may be more sensitive to others? Well, this survey was run with something like 400 people. We ran tests over 2 weeks with one specific atmosphere and 4 colors. And we had about 100 persons for each of these dining atmospheres. So we considered the possible factors that could explain for the segmenting of the preferences, but we didn't observe anything in terms of gender, age, time of the meal, whether lunch or dinner, whether having lunch with colleagues or having dinner with friends out, etc. However, I'd perhaps soften this resistance, saying that we were rather here in a luxury type of setting with dishes presented by Chef Boivin, who have, I would say, a strong identity and who strongly contribute into the pleasure of having food rather than the atmosphere itself. We are doing the same with the retirement homes. In fact, we can see effects when a lot needs to be further improved, whereas in that particular setting with the chef, the expectations of people were high and the results were already pretty high. This is why we certainly did not observe many distinctions between subjects. More questions, maybe? I'm sorry, I can't really see very well from the podium.
Bonjour Agnès, merci pour ta présentation.
Thank you, Agnès, and thank you for this presentation. I'd like to get back to your survey about hospital food and the aspect of food. How about participants? Did you consider that for some, the aspect of the food is very important, whereas others would rather privilege the taste rather than the look? I'm afraid I won't be able to tell you much about it because we've just received the results and we've still not debriefed over them. But this is the reason why I won't be able to answer specifically on this. But from our first leads, as you could tell from our presentation, we're not fully right with this presentation because, for example, we had chicken and pasta and the chef said, look, we should add a bit of color with pasta. So we also played with the sensory aspect, that is the visual aspect. So we just wanted to check whether there was an improvement by moving from a standard chicken and noodle to something which was perhaps a little more sophisticated. So the current task we have to deal with now is to have a plan for an experiment that should be a little more controlled. We want to control aspects that are strictly related to, I would say, the cosmetic aspect of the plate, how food is being presented in the plate, and then we'll further work with changes in the taste. So I'm hopeful I can give you an answer, but that'll be later, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, Agnès. I'm afraid we'll have to stop here if we want to stick to our time schedule. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers, and I suggest we give them a round of applause.